And we are live.
And who does?
I do.
Christopher just sharing his revenue plan for making new books.
Well, I mean, that's good. That's like 16 cents for each of us.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so I think this is the updated issue. Steve, do you want to walk us through it? What changed from last time?
Yeah, sure. Okay, on this title page here, are you streaming?
Yes.
Okay. On this title page, I did add a bullet that was requested about expectations for using JSON.NET versus this. So that's I guess, under the first main bullet. Just read that. Basically, I mean, one of the reasons why we're doing this is so that we can replace a subset of people using JSON.NET. So anyway, I just made that explicit, as was asked from the last review. That's the only changes on the top. So if you want to scroll down to the main JSON Serializer API. Okay, I did not XML doc these yet. I mean, I will do that, of course, before the code review. But it just clutters it up so much. And it's nice, I think, to look at it all at once here.
Yep.
Basically, everything stayed the same except for the naming here and a typo or two. So instead of JSON converter dot from to methods, it's JSON Serializer dot read write methods. Some of the parameter names changed to say like UTF-8 JSON instead of just JSON, for example, or just reader or just writer. Otherwise, I guess I'll just wait a minute until everyone kind of absorbs this and wants to comment on it.
The reads and writes that return string and byte look weird to me.
Sorry, which
the reads and writes. The write that returns byte array.
Yeah.
Looks weird.
How does it look weird?
Normally, when you write to something. If you're getting something back, you do a to conversion. So it makes sense for the read and write to be like named that way because they take in a stream or whatever. But if you're returning the actual thing that you've written,
Yeah,
it's normally to blah or blah.
Right, the name implies a side effect. It
Yeah.
does not imply you're constructing the radius.
So it fits for the stream and byte writer overload, but the one that returns byte array is more like to JSON.
Yeah, I think originally like Steve had it the other way around, but everything
Yes,
was to JSON. And then he gave him the feedback and said we don't want this for the other types, but I think this is probably an example where we should go the other way around again.
Right.
Because I think it would be easier to understand this way. Or not have the API at all. That's also an option. But I think eventually you want an API like that.
Yeah, I think the API has utility.
Okay, so the read and write, and I guess write string and read string methods. We're thinking maybe switch back to front two on those.
Yeah, the question is, what do we want for this thing? Like, are we okay with byte array?
You mean
The reason
write
I'm
to
asking is
byte array?
because if we eventually regret that choice and want to return something else, then you want to add an overload to that, right? You don't want to have.
Well,
Like if you make it too generic as a name, then it's hard to add an overload.
so why this method doesn't follow our general pattern of taking the buffer as an input parameter?
The right one?
Why don't we have a write?
It'd have to return
This
like bytes consumed.
Because then you
try
can
write.
basically take span,
Yeah.
and then you can pass it the byte array, you can pass many things.
Yes, but if you don't know how big it is, like if you want this method just to do the whole like, just return the data to me, do whatever
Easy
allocation
mode.
you need to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and this
Span
is
is the try bytes consumed,
This is-
do a loop.
common enough that there will be people who just want the ease of give me a buffer that's big enough.
And if somebody just wants to write it efficiently to their own pool buffer, what do they do?
Maybe there should be a new.
That's the
overload for
issue.
that.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
they can use stream, although the stream methods are async right now.
Requires allocation though. You have to allocate a stream wrapping the byte array to like do
Yeah.
anything.
The other question is like, is the other one efficient though? Like, imagine your span is not big enough. Like on all the other APIs, given that you say how many bytes you have written, you can at least resume. This one basically has to resume the serialization probably. I don't think you can incrementally serialize an object graph in any sane way.
It can actually.
Is it
It can.
easy enough?
Because we have to store state.
If
It
the only thing you have, well, if you return a state maybe, but if the only thing you know is the number of bytes,
Then you're screwed enough.
that will be
You need
very
state
hard.
round trip.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of double compute work that would be needed if we had an API that returned basically get how many bytes this would write?
Still need the state. How far it got.
Given the amount of policy you have to evaluate, you probably
I would
basically have
expose
to serialize it.
It's a lot of.
No, I think what he was saying is there could be an API that first you measure, and then you have to pass an buffer with large
That
Right.
distance.
That's
requires
expensive.
significant changes all the way down through JSON
Yeah.
reader.
No.
Yeah.
It's expensive too.
I don't know. We should think about it. I can.
And
imagine-
also, I think that we can add these later in some ways anyway. I mean, especially the one that you pass in a buffer. There are also the iBuffer writer work that the pipe uses, which can auto expand.
So how does this work for things like Web API? Like, is the expectation that, for the most part, even if you could determine the buffer size, that the output actually fits a single buffer, or is it not true that most of the time you will have to do multiple buffers?
We use the pipe writer overload, our stream overload.
Yeah, in which case, is span really what we want without some sort of state? Because I think if we would return a state and make serialization effectively incremental, then I think having a span-based API would make sense, because then you could implement the effectively the pipe writer one almost on top of no losses.
You can.
You would be inventing an entirely new kind of serialization that there's no precedent for anywhere else in the framework or in any third-party library.
I will say that does
Sure.
happen today internally, and it's really cool and it works and it's super efficient. But exposing it will be kind of.
Well, I mean, we kind of do it on the reader too. So on the JSON reader, right? Because if you have to unwind the frame, like how do you know?
It's
So we give you a
extremely
state
efficient.
object, and then that's what you pass in again.
But it's,
I don't think it's unclean. I mean, we just have to decide what the state is, and maybe the state, most of the state doesn't have to be even public.
If
It
it's
could just
opaque,
be,
it's like just return the thing and pass it back in. It's not so bad.
But
Yeah.
I'm kind of with Steve. Maybe we should postpone it.
Yeah.
I think it can be added later without a problem. We just add new method to this type that basically takes the state or something.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because it's the same discussion I had with Fowler and Asan last week. Is that, well, how low do we want pipe writer to be, and how low do we want this library to be, right? Because right now we can either say the JSON library depends on the pipes, or we can say pipes depends on JSON, because you have to put the API somewhere. And neither choice is great. If we can just say there's a state object and we just have a very simple API, then we can implement whatever we want easily on top without any crazy.
Like the easiest way to make this allocation free while still controlling your own spans would be to just pool a pipe writer instance, rather than dealing with the state object.
Or pull a custom
Or pull a string.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is the easy way to do it. Agree.
Well, we could introduce this async iBuffer writer, and it would also solve the problem.
For writes, not
Yeah, I
reads.
think we probably want that eventually.
Yeah.
Right. So the write that returns the bytes, maybe the right verb on that one is serialize, and it shouldn't look like a semi-overload of the other guys. The second set of read methods, the ones that are task of object, their input parameters are inconsistent. They should be UTF-8 JSON to match all the other overloads.
Yeah. And shouldn't we return a value task of t instead of task?
Steve said test.
Yeah.
For the ones that return t, he said task for the ones that are non-generic. Or for the ones that return an object, that should be value task. I thought
The question,
so task for everything. Allocate, like why?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So in the previous iteration, I think read async was returning task and write async was returning value task or something like that.
Right.
And my feedback was, well, write async task is fine unless you expect you can do something very complicated. But for read async, it really depends on whether you expect these to be, quickly completing. Like if you can give this, if you're able to pool the pipe writer and stream, or if you expect that an individual pipe writer or stream is going to contain multiple things to deserialize one after the other or some such thing, then if the reading is likely to complete synchronously, which seems reasonable for small payloads, then value task could make a lot of sense.
Yep.
Why not just return task.completed task at that point?
No, because it returns task object. So for reads, not for writes.
Oh, okay. Yes, got it.
Yeah. So those should be value task of T. They will complete for a bunch of cases.
That does raise a question I had, which is, so is it common then for a pipe reader or a stream to contain multiple things to deserialize one after the other, such that you'd reuse them, or we expect these to be pooled in some way, or what's the use case here?
So in Castro, for example, the pipe is pooled for the entire connection. And for HTTP2 is pooled per HTTP2 stream. So you get the same pipe instance across different requests because we reuse them over and over. But that isn't the main case is that the buffer will actually have the payload fully in memory before calling read async in a bunch of cases. So it should finish synchronously in I expect common cases where you're sending a small payload from the client.
Yeah, my question about reusability was more just in terms of if you were having to allocate the pipe reader and everything that came with it every time you called read async, then the task itself isn't going to matter. But if you're able to pool those, then value task makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, so for the most part, in ASP.NET, you'll have one pipe reader per connection. That'll be reused for the entire connection. So it's useful to not have to allocate here. Also, for Signaler, we have long-running connections, and you're parsing a bunch of payloads over that long-running connection. I think it would be valuable to have the thing that allocate, like, if we can avoid it.
But Steve, I thought that if anybody used async and await, since that was forcing the allocation from the state machine anyway, task was just better because it didn't do the into a struct and out of a struct.
Value task.
If it's synchronously completing, that's not the case. So if it's the non-generic value task versus task, that's the case,
that's the one.
Right? Because if it completes synchronously, you can just return task.completed task versus default task. Sorry. But if it's a T returning thing, so value task of T versus task of T, if it's synchronously completing, in one case, you generally need to allocate a task, and in the other, you don't. So that's why when we initially introduced value task, it was entirely about, we didn't have the non-generic one, and we only had the generic one, and it was entirely about the synchronously completing case. It was only in 2.1 that we also added additional support in value task of T for the asynchronously completing case.
Right.
And at that same time, we added the non-generic value task as well.
Steve, can you give an example of calling an async method and then have it return synchronously? Do you mean there's no await calls or something else?
Either there are no awaits that yield. So basically, yeah. So if you can await 100 things, but if all the things you awaited were already complete by the time you awaited them, then your method's going to complete synchronously. So if, for example, if you await memory stream.readasync, that read async is always going to complete synchronously because there's no actual asynchrony there. So when you await it, the await's just going to kind of be a no-op. You're just going to fly right through it, call get result, and keep running. On another stream, like buffered stream, for example, or file stream, which has a buffer in it, if you're reading, let's say, 1 byte at a time, and it internally contains a buffer that's 80,000 bytes, then 79,999 of your reads are going to complete synchronously. It's only, the last time or the first time the buffer's empty that you go to read that it's actually going to have to do an underlying network operation or whatever, and it's likely to complete asynchronously.
Okay, well, I can say that all of these async methods will, either await on a flush or a read or a write. But yeah, I don't know internally whether,
Well, like in the read async case in ASP.NET, from David's comments, it sounds like the pipe reader is likely already going to contain several K worth of data by the time read async is called. And so when it goes to read from that pipe reader, even though it's awaiting, those awaits are going to complete. The awaited thing is going to be already complete by the time you await it. So those awaits aren't actually introducing any asynchrony, and as such, this read async will likely also complete synchronously.
That makes sense. So it should be a value task of object and value task of T value.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, from everything I know, the read async should return value task of T, and the write async should return task.
Yeah. Yep.
Why different. I mean, they're going to have the same payload size, for example.
So the write asyncs. So if you have a non-generic task or value task, then there's no benefit to value tasks or completing synchronously because you can just return task.completed task. And there's actually some negative value to returning value task because it's actually bigger. Like it's, a 2-pointer size instead of 1-pointer size. So when it's stored in the caller state machine, it's actually going to make their state machine bigger. Now, in the grand scheme of things, does that matter? Who knows? And if we really wanted, symmetry, well, okay, we could have everything returning value task. But the only place here that I see real value, no pun intended, in returning a value task is on read async. And there's additional benefits to returning task in that the API is easier to use.
Yeah.
That said, if we really believe that in the future there were additional optimizations we could do even for the asynchronously completing case, I kind of doubt it, but if we believed it, we could have it return value task.
Yeah.
Okay,
So given that this API lives in a .NET standard compliant package, you'd have to multi-target and change the API surface then?
Why? No, we've got value task in a net standard 1.3 or something package that type forwards on NetCore.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so is the thinking then for the read async methods we return value task of object?
Yes.
And value task of t value, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but for the writes, just leave them as they are.
That would be my recommendation, but I care more about the read async.
I will make that change. I'll add that to the list anyway.
Christoph, were you going to say something?
Well, if we are done with this async value task discussion, I wanted to come back to the returning byte array. How do you measure and allocate the right size, or you would allocate larger array, write to it, and then copy?
Yeah, we there's a default buffer size on the options class. And if it's specified, we'll use that. Otherwise, we use 16K. And so we'll allocate initial memory pool buffer and then grow that as needed. And then when we're done, copy it into the proper size byte array.
So would it make sense, now that I'm thinking, to return memory of byte? Then we don't have to actually, potentially it may be no copy.
Like
because basically you can pass a very large one to the options. You get memory, basically we write to this buffer and then we slice and return memory of byte.
Memory of byte is less generally useful than just byte array because fewer APIs throughout the rest of the framework take it.
I know, but this seems like literally you're always going to have a reallocation in a copy. There's no way to avoid it.
Yeah.
I mean, you
must be very lucky to basically...
You could still do this in a completely allocation-free way if you wanted to, as an internal implementation detail.
Not allocation-free. I mean, there's one copy, right?
No,
one byte array allocated somewhere.
As an internal implementation detail, internally, we could pool pipe writers, write to something backed by the array pool, and then once we figure out what the entire discontiguous block is, then we know how many bytes we've written. We now allocate a single byte array, copy all of the chunks one after another, release everything back to all of the pools, and then return to you.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
That still requires a copy.
Yeah, it requires a copy, clearly.
You could just use a memory stream and then get the internal array from that memory stream. Then you can't. The thing is, that's an array segment.
That requires multiple copies.
That's an array segment. No, that's one. It's one.
Well, memory stream is backed by a single contiguous byte.
Depends on whether or not you guess.
So no matter what we do,
yeah.
if we don't return memory of t, there's at least one copy.
Yes, clearly.
Yeah,
yes.
I was saying that if I want to avoid any copies, I could pass very large buffer to options, and then never get.
Oh,
basically,
yeah. But this was
it would never copy.
Yeah, this was what we were talking about earlier about having an overload that takes a buffer to write into.
Well,
right?
but that one is more complicated because it requires state, and the usage is kind of more complicated because you have to copy it. So I kind of understand we don't want it on this.
The thing is, though, the thing about the ownership of the return value, like, it still has to be a copy because you can't return the pool memory from internally because, like, when do you return to the pool?
Well, so ownership, it cannot be pooled array. That's a negative.
So it has to be an array.
There are no copies. There are no copies.
It also is going to mess up things because then you can't reuse the buffer. If you return a memory of T from the backing buffer and don't do the copy, then you have no clue when the user is done with that, and then so you can't reuse the buffer.
What do you mean? How is it different from returning byte array?
Because that's something that the user owns. We're creating a new array, copying it, and saying, you now own this, versus we are returning a slice to our internal buffer, and now we can't reuse it because you have a copy of it.
There has to be a heap buffer that is returned to the user that they can use.
In both cases, there's a heap allocation.
There's a difference. There's a difference, though. In the case, if I get an 80K buffer from the array pool, I write 5 bytes into it, and then I say, a new array for those 5 bytes. I get to keep reusing my 80K buffer that's probably Gen 2 and so on, and just return my new allocated 5 byte. If I instead take the 80K buffer out of the pool, write 5 bytes into it, and return that wrapped in a memory, I'm now handing back 80K worth of buffer space for 5 bytes and also a Gen 2 array.
Yeah, I think what Christopher is suggesting is not doing that.
Yeah.
Basically, he's saying you create a new array in either case. I don't give you back the array, I just give you back a memory of T, which is the right slice. So that means, yes, I produced an array that is not pooled, but at least there's no copying.
That'll solve this issue.
Right,
you have to allocate.
But then you're doing an 80K allocation every time. And so the only optimal way to use it would be to continue reusing slices of the unused portion of the buffer.
No, because basically
but you can't do that.
No, it's the same here, right? So if you return a byte array, whatever byte array size that is, you have to produce it every single time,
That's
right?
the issue. Yes.
That's inherent to this API.
Yes.
But Christopher suggested we do the exact same thing, except we don't give you back the value as an array, we give you back this thing as a memory of T, so that if the array that we allocated happens to be larger than what we actually needed, we don't have to create a new one. We could just return the one and slice it down to the right size.
I'm pretty sure the 5 bytes of copying is going to be cheaper.
No, if it's 5 bytes of copy. Like, let's talk about real scenarios, not we allocated 80K and then we wrote 5 bytes.
So I think the actual implementation of this thing under the covers is going to use a series of byte arrays rented from the array pool.
Nah, memory stream.
Memory stream involves more than one copy.
Only if you end up resizing. So you start with some capacity, and then you add you write to it, and then you call target array, which gives you the internal segment, and you return that.
So why not just start with the array pool and a memory stream? Because if you're doing a memory stream, now you have multiple allocations under the covers.
Because you have to go from the array pool to a heap buffer anyway to return the buffer size. What I'm saying is that if you use a heap allocated pool, a heap allocated thing in the first place, there's no copy required after you write into it. You just pass that buffer back to the user.
Right, but
there's
the how good is your prediction of how big of a size it is?
Yeah.
As a question
4K.
of how much you're...
No, but you can't return to 4K, right?
No, but you say memory stream, you use 4K by default, and then if you write less than 4K, you get the same buffer. You go over that, it resizes, and then
but here's the thing, right? If you go over that, you're now copying and copying and copying and copying and copying over and over.
Yeah. It's the thing we do all the time. I know.
Well, we've now said that we now have a scenario which is probably relatively common where we're ending up regressing performance significantly over just using a standard array pool.
Wow. Well, let's talk for a second about the byte array overall in general.
Copies versus
I think the value of this API is not high performance, right? I think this clearly cannot be our primitive that we can build other things on top of, right? Because it will not going to be efficient. Like if we really want a primitive operation that we can implement other things like pipe reader, pipe writer on top of, it needs to be something like the state API we talked about, right? So anything else we do here, it's all about people, for whatever reason today, need byte arrays because that's how the system exchanges things. So probably whatever you do with this value is not going to be efficient anyway. So like I think this API is purely for interoperability and some amount of convenience. And I would say that, we should not be super inefficient, but I also don't think we need to be super efficient either. Like you can probably get away with a few copies.
What are typical payload sizes here?
So what?
What are typical payload sizes?
Probably more than 4K.
For what? For the reads or for the writes?
How many bytes is this thing generally deserializing into an object?
Well, we're talking writes though, correct?
Yeah, writes are normally
Right? How many bytes is this thing generally serializing to an object?
More than 4K?
For web API, more than 4K probably. But you wouldn't use that API. In that case, right? You use a stream API.
Right. So this is somebody who's just writing a simple little application. They want to say they've got this object and they want to serialize it, and for whatever reason they think that they want the bytes back afterwards instead of just writing it to an output stream. I think that the extra copying memory is fast.
It would be
So
good to
I
avoid
think
that
that this
copy
is
if
fine.
we could, though.
I think we need this API no matter what. So it's just a question of, do we need another API?
No, the question is more, should it be byte array or should it be memory? Byte array is more readable.
But I think that, like, for example, we have a write string, which returns a string, and we have a write method that returns a byte array, just for, if anything, symmetry.
But you can't
want
return byte. So the problem is, if it returns byte array, what do you call the one that returns memory?
Write memory.
Well, we don't have any. Actually, Jeremy, you can correct me on this. I don't think we have any APIs in the framework that just, out of whole cloth, create a memory of T backed by a T array and return it to you. Correct?
I don't think we've added any yet.
Not
the
yet.
places that we usually have write to span or return an array.
Yeah.
Which sucks because it forces callers to copy and create proper arrays.
But if the common use case is going to be like, I have a memory of T, I need to turn it into an array, to array. Now there are two copies.
The thing is, there are some cases where you need to call the API because you want to send bytes somewhere else. So, for example, in Sigma for Redis, we can't actually write to the stream because the client may be on a different machine.
Yeah.
So the bytes get put into a byte array to get sent over the wire.
But the best way that you would do that is you would use a memory stream. You would pre-allocate your buffer. You would call write in with stream. You send your data out. You reset it to position 0. You call serialize
so
again.
if you want perf, don't call write byte array.
Right.
Create your own stream, pool it.
Yeah.
And then do what we said we would do in the first place.
Yeah.
Right.
Call trig array on memory stream.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean that's fair.
I was about to ask, who's the consumer of this API? Because it seems, whatever scenario it is, it seems contrived. What are the scenarios where you cannot manufacture a stream? Would be very slim. I mean, worst case, you create a memory stream.
I mean, we can say that we want to just delete it and that you use memory stream.
Yeah, I think
It's a
that's
convenience
reasonable.
API.
It's convenient.
Yeah. But memory stream is hard to go.
So that was just let's
right?
let's move on.
Yeah.
The second question I have: why do we take type for the write method that take object
Okay. I can,
versus just calling value get
I
type?
had the same question.
There's a
Okay.
runtime dynamic type security concern. The caller needs to be aware of what type they're writing down. And if they want to be fully dynamic, they can call object that get type.
Yeah. So if let's say you've
I
got
had the same.
the section at the bottom of this talk in the design notes.
Where's the question? Can type be null?
If value's null.
if you have a class,
okay.
if you have an object which is really type A, but they're passing it around as type B, which is the subclass of A, then you need to serialize it as type B, not as type A, because you could be exposing additional details that you don't want to expose.
Well, what do you mean by they are passing them? They are
So-
passing it around as object.
So you have in your code, you have a local whose compile type, whose statically determined type is person, but the actual runtime type of it is employee or manager. And maybe it also has properties like salary and stuff on it that you don't want going out across the wire. If you're using the generic type inference and calling any of the write methods that are generic, the T value in this case is going to be person, because that's what is statically known to compile.
So
type.
we are using the type system as a way to scope which properties we serialize.
Yes, all serializers do this, except mine.
I don't think that's
This is
super
a
secure.
well understood. This is a well understood mechanism that most serializers use.
Steve, if I pass null for type because my object is null, will that work?
Yes.
Good. Cool.
And you serialize it as null, right?
It does it in the prototype. It'll write, NULL basically.
Okay, that's good.
What happens if you pass in null type when object is non-null?
Can't figure it out.
Yeah. You get an exception.
Yeah.
I actually wrote an MVC thing using the latest APIs and I got it working.
Was it a good experience, or did you hate yourself?
Single line, like for most cases, like read and write. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, I'm not gonna find it. I think it's.
I had the same. I was like, why does
I don't
object
think
take a
it's
time? And I was like, oh,
security problem. Like, don't stick secrets and then pass the thing to the serializer.
The problem is third-party types don't know what serializer their types are being serialized with, so they have no way of controlling it.
To be fair, though, that's the inverse of the thing you were pushing for a few weeks ago, months ago, when we talked about our guidelines of seeding types by default. And people often extend types purely to add properties for maintaining state, right?
Yeah,
And that's the same here, right? You just derive from it from person, you stick some intermediate state on it, and suddenly it ends up on the wire, and you may not want
and
that.
Because the read is static,
it's easy enough to like.
based on what you said you wanted to
use.
read
It's
as,
not a problem.
it would always throw away these extra properties, so it's wasted bytes on the wire.
And there's
I can
also
give you
the
a
case of you have some core
Fair enough.
interface or abstract type, and then you've got a per platform provider type that's built on top of that, and you don't necessarily want to serialize the Unix specific properties or the Windows specific properties.
Well, I think in Crystal's defense, though, like if you're aware of what's going on, like you could do the exact same thing without abusing the type system. You could just have suppress serialization attributes on the properties or whatever, right? So like if you design your hierarchy,
Well,
like it's not necessarily to do
design
it by
the
the type, right?
Yeah, people don't do that by default.
Yeah, I'm not saying
So-
it's a good idea. All I'm saying is that depending on how you structure it, that's just one way of
If
doing
people
it.
don't do it, then also the hierarchy may be not what they exactly want to serialize. I mean, like we basically just have one knob, and it's not very flexible to filter out properties that are serialized.
Well, I think it's rather that
there are multiple now.
There's more than one knob.
Yeah, I think it's rather people design their types with use in mind, but not necessarily with serialization in mind. Lots of people write
I
types and
completely
they're
agree. I'm just saying
don't even
this small feature doesn't solve all the problems. So I would rather have a feature that solves all the problems and then don't have this.
What would that look like?
It makes you think though, because you're like, you're passing a type here.
Do we all agree we need a way to so people can select which things to serialize?
Yeah.
Right? Well, let's design this way.
Okay, that'd be data contract serializer where you have to paint absolutely every property with this is allowed to go on the wire.
I don't think that's the conclusion.
From a
It has
security
to be.
perspective, that's the only option.
Well, I think, this behavior, by the way, this behavior where you specify the static type as opposed to the runtime type is the same behavior used by data contract serializer, JSON.NET, XML serializer, MVC model binding. It's used by like some of our
JSON.NET
internal
does
stuff.
not do that.
It does.
It type.
Does by default when you use the statically typed members or the statically typed serializer.
So I would agree with Christoph if
I don't think it does. I mean,
we
I
would
played
be
with it last.
if we would be okay with doing basically how protobuf works, right? Where literally you put an attribute on every single thing you want to serialize, because then you think about the things you're serializing. It's just that I don't think that design will fly because people really want just POCOs to work. That doesn't
No,
put
but
attribute
the
everywhere.
way I would design the feature is by default it's POCO, and then the moment you want to select which properties you don't serialize or deserialize, then there's a feature that is very powerful and lets you do everything that you would want.
The problem is
we now have we have the serialized POCO, and then we have one feature to select fields that it's not very flexible.
If .NET did not support using third-party types, then yes, that would be valid. But we do.
All type, like system private correlate, that's it.
If
No
you were
types
limited
aside
to
from
what we provide you in your own application, that would be fine. The
What
problem
would be
is,
fine because I don't.
The problem is the third-party DLL doesn't know that you're going to use JSON Serializer, so it can't use JSON Serializers. Do not write this to the wire attribute.
No. Okay, so let me give you an example of a feature that's how you not write to the wire. You pass an array of strings that are mangled names of properties to not serialize.
So, by the way, MVC did this.
I didn't yet say which, what is the way to control it. I'm just saying it would be nice to have a feature that lets you control it in a very flexible way.
We tried this. We tried this with MVC, full framework MVC, like versions 2 through 5 or whatever. It's in core as well. Yeah. Do people actually use it successfully in practice? Yeah.
So you have basic global registration where you can say on this type don't serialize these properties.
No, it's at the call site. So like there's a bug called overbinding that's typical in web applications where like you declare your object as input, and people can overbind to things that they didn't expect to be there in the first place. So you say bind these 5 things only, but that, I mean, it gets verbose really fast. So
I'm not. So I didn't even propose that this is the way.
Still no one does it.
What I'm saying is now we have a feature that basically adds complexity to the APIs, doesn't solve the problem. Because if you happen to have a hierarchy where the base type actually has the properties that you want to serialize and the subtype doesn't, well then this feature works. But as we just observed, people don't design hierarchies as such. They don't think about serialization. So sooner or later we will run into a case where people are serializing wrong things, and then we don't have a control.
Is you should make serialization specific types. You should not be serializing your runtime state. You should be serializing your serializable state, and then now things will make more sense. But we're not in this meeting going to be able to reshape it if you have a strong objection.
But Christoph, so like you want to remove the type overload from the type parameter from right, I think. This past object I'll get type.
So
I saw it too.
I do have a section that talks about this in the design notes. Maybe we should take this offline. I know Jeremy and I talked last week for at least about an hour, And also, on the read methods, if you have, the customer employee scenario or person customer or whatever, we only know how to serialize, the static type. We don't know because we don't put the name of the type in the JSON. A lot of other serializers do that. We don't, and we don't know what to serialize. So it's kind of somewhat symmetric by not supporting it on write because we can't support it on read. And I think there is an option, and I note that in the section that I referred to, that we could enable this as an opt-in model to basically call get type on every object that you pass in here up front, or any object returned from a collection or from a property.
Wouldn't it be an overload? Doesn't pass the type in? Isn't it as simple as an overload? It's more of do we want it to be exposed as the default?
It's how much does it do it on your fields? Your properties. You now have a property that's of type person. Does it serialize it as person or customer or?
Is this nested? Is this whole idea like
exactly because that's getting on another issue?
I thought it was just API.
What about you pass an object graph and it has properties it returns types.
It never calls
which type do you serialize for this?
It's only statically determinable information that gets sent out. Yep.
Yeah. So basically, if you have a collection of persons, you could.
Yeah, this filtering. This filtering mechanism only works for the root type and not for the children.
The children are always based on the static type of the property.
Yeah. No, but that makes sense because how would you read it back in?
Yeah, you have no way of reading it.
Unless we write types out, which
If you have an array of people, right, and then you have like a manager and an employee, that's great. But how to determine by looking at the JSON payload which type you wanted to instantiate?
Because we've said we're not going to add type discriminators because we're not going to support payload determined deserialization.
No, that's fine. That part I'm not worried about. It's more, I'm just wondering.
Clearly JSON doesn't do that either, right?
They do it too.
You can turn it on.
How would they? Sorry, no, I mean like unless they write out a type name as a property.
Yes.
It means you can't.
That is that feature.
No, it means you can't round trip it. Right. That's different.
Yeah.
Sure, although in practice I would say that's kind of.
You can write a converter on the input and have it figure things out, but that's not.
Yeah, if you need the dynamic stuff, you can do it right now by writing individually object by object instead of doing it one call from the object. Yeah. You can do it. It's just this
maybe
API
it should just be an option.
Makes it hard, and it intentionally makes it hard.
Maybe it should just be an option. You pass into the options
to write.
Use runtime type.
A bool that would say, enable polymorphic write.
Right.
You set to, and we'll call basically the serializer would call get object.
Right. Since we're essentially now talking about redesigning the feature, we should table this and
sure.
And move on to the API so we actually can cover some of that.
And again, this is supposed to be an MVP, right? So if unless we think that these features are required for the MVP, I would definitely want to defer for now and for later discussion or for the next release.
So how do we feel about the generic method? The generic method is fine though, right? Everybody is fine with that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we change write string to get string and write to get bytes?
Okay, yeah. So let's talk about that. So we didn't like the write and read methods on these simple ones that return byte and whatever.
Well, read,
So
read is fine.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Read, you're reading a string.
Yeah, read is fine.
I mean, normally it would be parsing a string, but I think it's
Okay.
or
So
decode.
we don't want
Put.
Yeah.
So there was feedback earlier on using to and from, I thought, on the non-async methods, right?
That was one suggestion, or serialize as the verb instead of write. Because write, the reason we went for write on the async versions is because write,
You're going somewhere.
the verb indicates there's a side effect. The problem with write string is there is a side effect, which is that you're allocating a string, but it's also the primary effect because you're returning it.
Yeah.
And so serialize string or
Serialize
two strings
string.
weird.
String, two string, get string.
Two strings
serialize.
weird because you're
Yeah.
calling JSON Serializer .toString, and it's like, well, why are you calling a toString method? That's an anti-pattern.
So in Go, I think
Stringify.
Ah.
So no.
Ah.
Because
because that's what
that's
it's called.
what that's what it's called elsewhere.
In Go, it has a nicer name.
Uh,
Like 2 bytes or something. I think it's 2 bytes.
I think toString is fine, honestly. If you have this pattern, here's when the framework where
So you want
based on the-
toString and 2-byte array, or to just eliminate the byte array overrides because we said you should
toString
use
to
memory
byte
string?
seem fine to me. But I mean, obviously, we probably want to remove the 2-byte array anyway.
Would,
right?
would
So-
people even know that toString can have like overloads
like
that
convert
aren't
toString?
that aren't?
The most popular API probably that we have.
Well,
Okay.
because I mean, they'd be in a,
Sure.
they'd
So
be in a
Go
static context.
uses
they would tell
Marshall
them it
and
is-
unmarshall.
I just
Marshall
think that
and Marshall.
toString, some people may think, not that I oppose the name toString, but some people would think that it's toStringifying the JSON serializer.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
usually our toString methods,
Or
they
on
create a
objects.
string representation of the thing that you call it on.
Yeah,
It's a
we
static
call
method,
it
though.
Extension method on
Ser-
object.
serialized toString.
Which is why it's like a convert to string, right? Like you're passing in the way that you want to convert it to
I
string.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so serialized to string.
That's too long.
I would not name anything serialized, given that the type you're on is
Fair
serialized.
enough. I was just trying to make it so that when you're looking at the IntelliSense, you don't see
Tostring.
toString and you'd be like, oh, this is inherited
Tostring.
from object.
I think
So
toString
JSON
is fine.
serializer, dot something to byte array to string. I mean, I know you don't. You just said you don't like to string, but
I mean,
before I was JSON, but
everybody
to
else seems okay with it. So
every
Why not just write to?
Well,
And the
right to
return
implies
type is
that
the type.
the verb write means there's a side effect of you're modifying the state of the input object.
Not just write to.
That normally implies that you're taking a stream or something as the destination to write to. Write to
Okay.
implies that you're taking a destination as input.
So what's the consensus?
2
Is there
toString.
toString.
and 2 bytes. And 2 bytes.
and also a 2-byte array or 2 bytes?
So
Or
I think we said we
2-byte
don't want to
array.
have the byte array one.
Yeah,
Isn't that the conclusion?
No, I thought we were gonna leave it.
I thought it was delete it and tell people use memory stream if you want.
Yeah, that's what we just said earlier.
Okay, so do we want to delete the one that returns byte
It
array
does mean
Yeah.
that everyone
Delete
would.
both of the ones that return byte array. Yeah.
Okay.
until we decide what to do?
Yeah.
Well,
And for
'cause-
now, it's just memory stream, and you'll do it.
Yeah. So
yourself.
memory stream can do it for people, and if we get enough if we get feedback that says that we should add it, we can always add it.
Read string.
It's just harder to delete things than it is to add them.
Read string.
Now we have like read string and toString.
So read string is bugging me now.
Read string can just be read. Like it's overload resolution. You don't need the noun in.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, read string was there because we had write string, and write string was required because it collided with one of the other ones.
All right, so
Yeah.
hold on.
So read and read async, and so reads would be sequence of bytes, span of bytes, and string, and read async is pipe reader and stream, and then
So when you come to our stack for the first time and you use this thing, and you're reading a tutorial, you do JSON Serializer
read.
read. Not bad. Passing in a T, passing a string payload, and then for write you call toString.
We could also say that the one that we call read string, we just go with either from string or parse or something, because
Okay, so
because it is different
or
from the
parse.
other ones, where the other ones just take the thing you're reading bytes from,
From
right?
yeah.
And like usually we have the same thing in the framework where we say,
we can call
load is effectively the verb we use when you actually deconstruct it from bytes, and then parse is when you parse in the string.
No, decode is when you're reading it from bytes.
Well, it depends on the thing, but like load is like, for example, x document.load or
you're instantiating a DOM at that point.
Well, I guess it's the same here, right? You instantiate an object graph, right? So
Okay, so write string becomes toString.
And read string becomes parse.
Parse or from?
Parse is fine from string. I mean, from string is effectively the same as parse, right? Like
Parse is good because it's JavaScript.
Yes, parse is our text to value verb.
Okay.
So this is text, so
Parse. I like parse.
And I do think that if we don't have the byte array overload here, people they have to do a lot of extra work to use memory stream, and they're probably just going to be calling the string versions and then decode or encode, which would suck.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't the read ones that take byte array be parsed too? Can you parse bytes?
well, again, in general, we say decode when it's bytes, but these bytes are actually
They're text, right?
They're text.
Yeah.
They're text.
So
For that email I sent out.
right. So if we had the char8 type right now, those would be char8. So probably the non-async reads should all be parse because they're all
So which ones are there?
the top two,
And
then they have a generic version in the middle, and then the
Because you're
two that are
passing
currently called
text.
read.
Yeah.
So we'd have read async,
Yep.
write async, parse, and toString.
Can you group those? Yeah. Group them when you do that.
Parse and toString?
I mean, they're already
That's what
symmetry
int
there.
has.
Either
not
from-
parse and int, not toString. Like, parse and toString are opposites.
Okay.
I want to go to like a thesaurus now and say, what's an antonym of parse? Tostring. Clearly.
I think we
Deparse.
should. All right. I think we should delete the read-only sequence one.
Delete the read-only sequence one?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know how you'd use it.
What do you mean?
How do you use it?
I call pipe reader.read. I have read only.
I think the real question is, it's sort of dependent on what we do with the pipe reader. If this is a little layer lower than pipe reader, then the read-only sequence would be how to use the pipe reader.
It wouldn't work. You'd have to change it to make it work. Today, as it stands, if you read from a pipe, you get a sequence, and then you pass in here, and how would you know how much you consume? You need the whole state thing to.
Since it doesn't tell you the
work.
out, these are the it reads, and if there's anything left, it throws.
Right. So here's the problem. Like when you're reading JSON, which is just unstructured, like no length prefix kind of thing, like there's no way to know how much you're supposed
this
to
method
pass.
needs to be try read.
And you pass, and it needs to return like.
Can you explain the problem again?
This assumes that you pass in the entire JSON payload
Trimmed to the end.
to the end.
Yes.
If you're reading from a network or reading from a stream, you don't know like what the end is. So you can't like read enough at first to pass in the entire sequence because you have no idea when the JSON ends.
So if the JSON's part of the request body, then the JSON ends either when you've read the number of bytes specified in the content length header or until the end of the request.
So imagine you're chunked, right? And you read the first 4K, and it's a 10K like buffer. And you pass in 4K here, and it consumes like some stuff. Does it return false? Like, does it say it didn't consume 8? This had to tell you what it did.
If you're chunked, like the actual
Chunk
like
body.
metadata between the chunks wouldn't be in here, correct?
It wouldn't, no. But the problem is when you get a payload back,
Yeah.
it isn't the whole JSON payload, and you pass it into this guy, it either throws.
So
or
what's your
returns
scenario
null.
where you have JSON in the middle of something that you don't have either a MIME content delimiter or a length?
Chunk
readout?
uploads, for example. You send a hex prefix to the length of the current chunk and a payload. So you send the first 4K as like a chunk, and you send the second 4K as a chunk.
Then why wouldn't that be a pipe reader or a stream instead of a read-only sequence? Because pipe reader and
All
stream,
I'm saying is this overload does not work well for that use case at all, because if the caller has to know what the entire payload is before passing it in, it can't work when you use pipes. So that it works fine for the pipe overload.
Sure.
It's for the first one that doesn't work. And I'm not sure what that scenario is, like what case that thing is for.
Well, so one case is I'm reading from a stream, and I'm getting data in chunks because I allocate a buffer, read it, oh, well, whole buffer is filled. I have allocate another buffer. Then I compose them into read-only sequence. That's our primitive.
You have
for
to
those.
know that the things you read is a full JSON payload.
No,
You have to scan
I
it.
agree with your problem.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That this API
Oh, no, I
is
get
not
it, yeah,
correct.
yeah.
I'm just saying this is
The scenario,
how I would get read-only sequence.
Agreed.
And not have actually a pipe.
Agreed. No, I agree there. The question is like,
But you're not necessarily parsing JSON semantically. You're looking for a MIME content delimiter or something.
Yeah,
so
so-
you can be scanning for something else. And
yeah.
not-
So
Yeah.
if you have a protocol on top of JSON that tells you what the whole payload is, it works fine.
Yeah, so an envelope. Of
So,
some
so,
kind.
in Sigma has a length prefix that's UTF-8 before parsing JSON payload. So it works for Sigma, but we still have to know how much got consumed.
And if you're reading data in chunks, you're probably doing asynchronous reads anyway.
Yeah.
Which means pipe reader and stream is probably what you want anyway.
yeah, correct. That's correct.
Okay, sure. I can buy that argument.
Yeah.
Okay, the reason why they're on here is because of the reader and writer supports it natively. I mean, that's originally why they're added here.
Yeah.
Do reader and writer, or rather the reader, does it let you do try read?
It supports passing the
well,
state back
it's
out,
the complicated.
calling you back into the
It's the
state
okay.
loop. Yeah.
So yes, if you're willing
But
to.
the problem, I mean, again, the problem with this one is try read. If it returns false, like it half allocated a bunch of objects in the middle and then
Yes.
throws them off
You need
to
state.
the GC.
Or you,
Like it's
or you
a
do it.
really expensive false.
Yeah.
So you want
Yeah.
the path to say you get true or throw.
I think we should
tell
remove
you.
this method. And basically, if we discover that we have a scenario, we design it properly so
Yeah.
that it can be re-entered, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And do you feel the same about the span one, or are you comfortable with the span of you understand what your segment
Span is usually smaller.
Well, a span is like I have
I have
data.
a byte array.
Like,
Yeah.
here's
I think
data.
that's
to
fine. I
parse
think that
it.
was fine.
Like maybe someone pasted it in on a console or something.
Yeah, I feel it's fine with easier.
Or you have an RPC call or something
Yeah.
like that.
For the span one, do we need an out consumed?
Same question, right? I don't know.
I wouldn't think so because I would think I would think it's a caller's responsibility to say this entire thing is a JSON payload.
Span is like string, I think.
Yeah, so this
passing
method
it-
would just slow up when there's
Yeah.
threading data, right?
Yeah.
So there's no the
Yeah,
consume is always
if
the
it's
same as the
incomplete or
encode
trail
blows
or
up.
too much data.
Yeah,
right?
if we get usages for, I know it starts here and let me know where it ended, we can add that later.
Yeah.
But for
Right.
this is I think what most people who are going to call something like this are they expect that they have a full payload with nothing trailing.
Yeah.
And so let's go with the easy scenario first, and we can do the more powerful one if we get customers.
Yeah, I think the only one to make this not suck is if you have states. Otherwise, you always end up with constructing a fuck ton of objects,
Yeah, no.
which makes try kind of useless.
You would need
The whole point is that it's cheap.
Oh yeah, I mean the only thing that would be for if we had an overload of read that outed the bytes consumed. See also discussion on should we use the word bytes and consumed. We would that one would read the first one, and as soon as it hits a balanced stack state, it would just tell you how far it got, and that would be fine. But I think that the average expectation then would be that the caller of that would say, oh, well, if you didn't read the whole thing, then throw. So we're just going to do that now. And if someone wants partial read later, we can add that.
Make it ref.
Maybe we should remove both.
I would slice it. Yeah.
Because it's easier to add APIs, like design them properly, and add them without having to then butcher names. We're gonna discover that like the overload doesn't work or something, and we want.
Okay, so now we're down to the read asyncs and parse of string.
Are we gonna
Well,
Are we gonna support UTF-8 string literals or byte string literals in C#8?
If we ever get it, then we'll have the type.
If that happens, then it'll be ambiguous, right? Between UTF-8 string and it's not.
No,
I guess
they'll be
I
different
guess it'll be
types.
U8.
They're
It'll be
different
U8.
types.
Okay.
Yeah.
That made the spell useful. Like JSON payload U8, and then it was just like.
Let's say more usable.
The read overload that takes a span isn't super usable
Oh.
today.
So Christoph thinks gets rid of
Both the reads.
both
I mean-
things that it's great because that means that there's less surface area that we have that uses byte when it char 8.
So I would push back on getting rid of the span one because that's the only way someone has a UTF-8 byte array that they would deal with it. I don't know why you're forcing people to encode into a string or use the async.
That's fair.
How did they get the byte array with exact JSON?
They
Say
run it.
file.readall bytes.
Yeah.
I guess in which case they should have used font string.
Yeah, it's only when you have an envelope outside of the payload that tells you the length.
Yeah. So anytime that you have an envelope that tells you the length.
Plus, I think if we are looking at this being, or some people going through and replacing existing JSON serializer things with this, there's a really good chance they're down in the bowels of their system somewhere where they were handed a byte array.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Probably strings.
Probably strings.
But we have string parsing, so that scenario is fulfilled.
Yeah.
But I think actually the scenario that Jerry mentioned is useful. Like I call file.readall bytes. I have a byte array pass it through.
You're a bad person. File stream.
The vast majority of people, I think, like don't want to deal with streams, async, anything like that.
JSON.NET messed up by not having those two overloads there to stream away.
Yeah.
Today, to make that work today, you have to first read the whole thing in memory and then do like insert to object.
Yeah. So if I'm
objects.
writing an application, right? Like the simplest thing possible for me to do in my application startup path is going to be file.read, pass it through here. Now I've deserialized my configuration.
They want to make that super hard. That's so that people aren't terrible.
Did you read bytes or string?
Doesn't matter.
No, it
String,
does, because if you
probably
read the
string,
bytes, you have a bomb.
I probably read string.
Read all text and then you pass it to
It's true because read all bytes. We would then say you gave the bytes. This is now text. Therefore, the bomb is
the bomb is invalid.
Interesting.
So
Yes, I probably read it as a string or a UTF-8 string. One of the two. Probably a string.
That does.
Well, if it takes a span, you can basically slice off the bomb.
I'm not going to slice off the bomb.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like
I didn't parse your email completely, but it reminded me of the bomb issue.
No, you're right. That is why it is called an abomination. Yes.
Oh my god, that's like $5 for the pun jar right there. All right, so I think so. Nick was just asking: is JSON Serializer options going to handle HTML encoding as a thing, or is that out of scope?
Out of scope.
I think it's out of scope, right? Yeah.
HTML encoding?
Yeah.
Doesn't JSON have
what?
Escaping or something? Some weird.
I mean,
not
so
escaping,
we have a proposal. So, by the way, we need to schedule the review for the JSON escaper. But once that review comes online, like the JSON serializer option should have an escaper as a parameter on it, but it would be JavaScript string escaping, not HTML.
Yes, that.
Yes, that's what I would think too. So Nick is claiming that system web serialization has that.
System. That thing is horrific. Did they use that thing?
Well, apparently he likes that part of
As
it.
you can hear, it has one positive
That
feature.
thing was the slowest one we ever wrote on the planet. It's called JavaScript Serializer.
Challenge accepted. I think we find something about
This thing.
JavaScript, this thing from like ASP.NET
The
3.5.
Dark Ages, yeah.
Like this never did HTML encoding. It does JavaScript string encoding.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yeah. But it allows you to plug in a custom one via a global registration, at least in full framework, not in
It
core.
does.
Yeah.
That thing is dead in core.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
believe it's in core.
You could pass it as an option. But again, it would be JavaScript string, not HTML.
He says it's only on accident.
What?
I don't understand.
Maybe
So I mean,
maybe it's in there.
well, the default one also escapes things like open and close angle brackets, even though JSON doesn't require them to be escaped because it assumes that you might put it inside HTML, and it does that as a defense and def mechanism.
I see.
And you could replace that behavior, I guess, if you wanted to.
Can you? Interesting. Does he want to plug it in somehow? The HTML.
I think that's what Nick is just saying. I think that's what he was referring to. He said HTML friendly was the intent here. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, the default behavior is there's a set of characters in addition to the ones that the JSON spec requires you to escape that we always escape anyway. We always escape single quote, we always escape ampersand, open brace, close brace. We always escape anything above the ASCII range. We always escape plus. We always escape backtick.
There's a
That seems reasonable. to me.
someone gave a bug feature request to only do the minimum amount of escaping during writing.
Yes.
Saw that one.
And you can absolutely do that by, if we have JSON serializer options that let you take in your own escape or interface, abstract base class, whatever, sure, plug it in.
Yeah, or it would, I mean, probably it would be an option on JSON, or on the JSON writer options, which is a field of JSON serialization. But yeah.
I do have a question about this thing being a static class. Is there no state anywhere?
Well, every method completes or throws.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there are any forced allocations because this thing isn't stateful. Is there anything?
The JSON serializer option has a bunch of cached state.
Okay.
But there might be a feature in the future, like if you want to have some overflow properties returned at the end of a read method, then there might be an extra argument on these. But yeah, currently there's no other state between calls.
You cache all the type information and stuff like globally in the static somewhere.
And it's stored, statically. If you use JSON serializer options dot add attribute, then the cache moves to the instance of the options class.
Yeah, think about that.
Because you're telling it you want to rewrite the default.
Yeah, but maybe we should talk about that in a second after we're done with this here, or are you thinking that we might need to make this instance based for some reason?
I'm just wondering.
Well, that's
yeah,
JSON
it has both models. We have a JSON converter class, which is static, and then they have the JSON serializer class, which is instance and allows you to do some state related stuff with adding converters and things like that.
Yeah, we pull ours today in MVC because of that. Okay.
One thing we should be careful with is burning the best name. If we ever think we're gonna have a type that you instantiate and you can do the, converters and all the nodes that you need, what would that type be called?
Well, not just the type, also the methods on the, like if you want to make it the simple type, which is what JSON.NET did, then that naming convention will very quickly fall on the face now, because now all the good names are now taken by static methods. You're gonna have instance methods with the same signature, so nope. That's because it's basically there's no explicit this, right? It's all implicit. So that doesn't work. So then the only other option is to have a different type, which now goes back to Crystal's argument of
I mean,
that's
it
what
was
James
originally
did.
proposed as JSON converter, and we
That's what
renamed it
James
in the
did.
last meeting to JSON serializer.
Right.
So we said take the good one.
To be honest though, we should look in this. I don't think we need because the current design accommodates both global state as well as instance state by just using it as using basically the JSON serializer option
The options.
Yeah. Which seems reasonable.
It does not have method state though. That's the thing that I kind of talked about. Like if you do a read on a complex tree and you have some overflow properties, for example, like properties that don't exist on a type, but they exist in the JSON, we have to figure out where to put those. And there's two ways I think to do it. One is you stick them on the object, and then you have to say, hey, this field is used to store the overflow properties, for example. JSON.NET supports that mode, or you return them with a method. And I don't have an argument. We'd have to add another argument to the end. Or the third option, I guess, is to have an instance of the serializer and put it on some properties to say, hey, these are your overflow properties for all types or something like that.
No.
So I think there is some cases that you might want to have per call, like maybe you want to handle some error handling and you don't want to put that on the options class because you only want it for this method. The options class is intended to be immutable and shared because it has all the caches on it.
The error handling is interesting. That one's going to come up.
So what happens when you call add attribute after I call the method already?
What happens if you call add attribute?
Yeah, do you basically validate the cache afterwards?
Right now I have it documented as you can't, once you start serializing, deserializing, you can't start changing, you can't add attributes.
Oh, you just throw basically when I do that?
Yeah. The prototype doesn't do that right now, but that's the proposed semantics, is to make that immutable.
It's basically implicit freeze upon first serialization, deserialization. I think that's reasonable.
Okay, it seems like we're kind of talking about the next section. So if we can kind of close this out, I think the only thing unknown for me right now is the write method that returns byte array. whether we want that or not, and if we do, what do we want to call it?
Let's delete it for
Delete it
now
for now.
and wait for people to ask for it.
Yeah.
So which one do we delete?
The binary returning right.
Yeah, that's okay.
I mean, and also we deleted the read-only sequence
Yeah.
versions. Yeah. Okay, can we move on then to the options class?
One sec. Well, it's not so much that. It's also like I can only think in one way. So having a second
Do
laptop
we know
doesn't help.
how to do overloads now with default default parameter values?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to know how, or you just want to know
If
whether
we add the per call error handling,
Yes.
we just add an argument.
Yeah. So the way this works is you have a method that has defaults. If you have another parameter, you create another overload. The previous one we remove all default values, and on the new one we add all the default values
I
back.
see.
And then this way, like it always binds to the
I
this
see.
one.
Interesting.
It's actually pretty straightforward. The only thing you can't do realistically with versioning is if you have multiple different kinds of overloads, where the whole like pattern is different. That's when things usually go like south. But if you just have like a never-growing list of optionals, that's pretty straightforward.
Okay, the options class. We kind of got started on this before, so I'm just gonna, unless you want to read this, I'm just gonna skip over this. It's talking about the same stuff we talked about before.
Move to this.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, just move to the script, and I'll kind of explain what changed since last time. Okay, since last time there was a I don't know, stack size or something like that. That was removed because it was added, or it's going to be added to the reader and writer options. The bulk of the time last time that we talked about this were these three properties in the middle, these case insensitive and skip properties. Before they were called something else, and they had default values that we didn't like. So now I renamed these three, and they all have default values of false based upon what we thought the default semantics should be. And then the other stuff is the same. So here's kind of the new names I came up with based on our discussion last time. And I think having a common default value for bools is a good thing. So I renamed them appropriately to make them false.
So skipping null values, you're only referring to skipping null values on properties and not items and arrays?
Right. So, and also not, yeah, and there's also probably going to have to be settings for dictionaries, like for the case sensitive thing as well, you know, but I do prefix that with property name, but I do not prefix the skip with skip null property value on read, but maybe I should.
Well, so Steve, if they're applying only to when the property value is null, should they be skip null property instead of skip null value? Because that would take the array out of the scope.
Yes, that sounds reasonable.
That's feedback I've had from null value handling in JSON.NET, where people say is I set this to ignore null values, but I still get null values in my arrays. What's going on?
Okay, thank you for that. Yep.
So email. Skip null value on read and skip null value on write, or now skip null property on read and skip null property on.
And as I mentioned last time, I just have these three properties here. There'll probably be several more. Anything that's a simple enum or bool or integer or something like that, we would probably just put it here. It's not necessarily going to have all the settings. You might have to use this attribute mechanism. But this will probably grow to be a dozen different properties here.
You would add, so what did you just say? You want to add them or you want to rename them?
Rename them.
These two are being renamed. Value is being replaced with property
Okay, there.
to resolve an ambiguity with arrays and root values. And then it's that future options may exist or may be added as they are needed.
Yeah, the reason why I didn't have the property name on the skip null value and read because it's just exact same name that exists on the property attribute type. So it'd be kind of redundant, on the property attribute maybe to put the property name, but I think the names can be different, so it's not.
Yeah.
Yep.
Not a concern.
Let's skip null property and read, skip null property and write.
Yep. Why is default buffer size not nullable?
Because I guess it has a default value of -1.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Just make it null is what you're proposing.
Yeah, wondering if that's like a.
I don't know. What's the is there some previous like a reference implementation of this that uses null then that I should look at?
It's more about default values.
Why not just make it 16K?
Or that.
Like, we can change the value in future versions.
You're brave.
Yeah.
No, we can. It's not a const. It's a property.
Sure. How complicated it is. Fucking with buffer sizes has been
So
always a fun exercise.
yeah, so making it be nullable is good because that means that default. Oh well, I guess this is a class, so the default is null. But so never mind. If it was a struct, making it nullable would be good because then default of t would be all the defaults.
Well, default is 0. This is a class. So
Good.
-1. I guess we set -1.
I guess 0 is invalid, right? I would hope.
Well.
Yeah, zero's invalid.
Yeah. Well, what if I want to read nothing?
You have to wait.
No.
Null,
0 could be default too.
So nullable has the good
There's semantics.
of it has an obvious how do I return it to the default as you assign it to null.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
I was trying to hide the 16K,
Then make it null.
That's fair.
Then make it nullable then.
Yeah.
So Christoph nodded at nullable, so
Yeah.
let's just make it nullable
I
and the
think in
default's
this case
null.
it's fine. Since it's a class,
Yeah.
nullable is the main
Big struct,
disadvantage for something like this. It makes the struct larger.
Yep.
But here it doesn't matter.
We don't actually have to make the class or struct larger to do this, so fine. Because we can always regenerate that if we need to.
Yeah, it can internally store -1.
Yeah.
You could.
It's a property, it's a method, so you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So, kind of a high-level guideline question. We've had many of these option classes brought to the review, and we go back and forth between immutable, mutable, and what do you do when somebody mutates after you pass it, and so on and so on. I have to say I like the design of it's mutable.
Yeah.
And if you wrote some really wacky program that changes the options while the stuff is running, too bad, you shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
I think that would
Should it be our generic? This is the guidance. This is
in
how we design
general,
option
like
types.
I think that the notion of like the case insensitive property names of if you toggled that in the middle of while it's running, I kind of frankly don't care what it does. But the notion of you add an attribute to change how the serialization model would be, that one needs to seal it. That one needs to close itself against modification because it has data security.
Well,
Close when?
You may say it needs to. How would you implement the code?
That because this gets passed into all of the write methods, the write method would set an internal bool of I'm closed now, and then when you call add attribute, it throws you can't modify me after I've been used to serialize something.
Would it unopen itself after the operation completes?
I was going to ask the
Or
same
reopen itself?
question.
No.
So the problem with
Suppose not
that
to
in this particular case, so it could, but it's he would then need to invalidate the cache the attribute model, because he's using the attribute model or this object as a cache for the attribute model and what it resolves to.
But I'm still. Are you proposing that we make the options basically mutable option classes have freezability feature built in?
Yeah.
Well, the problem is that I
Sounds
think there are different kinds of options, right? So there's this kind of option which is like process, right? Where you basically just part a bunch of options, you start your process, you forget the options you passed in. You just have a convenient way
One-off.
to pass in the factor of values, right? The problem here is that this object also
Is state.
yeah. And then you're supposed to cache that yourself so that you avoid expensive operations. And I think in this case, the question is, if you are supposed to cache it, how likely are you to shoot yourself in the foot? At that point, I think feasibility or immutability is, I think, something we should think about. Because we are promoting, in fact, the thing that you will hang yourself with.
What kind of state does this actually store at runtime?
I think it's just a cache of like ref emit data.
Yeah, it caches metadata on every type that's serialized or deserialized, I guess, and then every property.
Should it be disposable?
And then in theory, IL would be stored on here if we start differing based upon these options, or if we do code gen, for example, and I mentioned that above, but if we use the settings on here to generate some code initially, then in theory, this class you'd want to be immutable as well from the outset, just so your code doesn't, break.
Does that mean that if I'm calling serialize, JSON Serializer.write, and I pass in new JSON Serializer options as the last parameter of every single call, you're going to recode gen every single time?
No, that's not true. We're not, of course, going to do that. And right now, the code only kind of locks down. You call that attribute, but it's a discussion worth having on what we want to do for how is this thing expected to be shared. If we want to share it across users in a multi-threaded case, well, then it's going to break, right?
I feel like the state storing model is kind of weird. Using the options as
that's why
the cache is kind of,
that's why I was a little confused, right? Because if you new up a brand new JSON Serializer options and then call write again, passing the new options, it sounds like you're reusing the existing code gen. So the code gen's not being stored here, right?
Where is it stored? It's static.
Static.
It's static until you call an attribute, I think. Right? And it moves to the options.
Well, because once you change any of these defaults, it would. I mean, I don't know how the implementation
I think so.
work, but like.
Well, right. Okay, I can say right now the implementation, and this is open for debate because all of the questions you're asking are ones I asked myself when I implemented. Is that today only when you call add attribute does the cache move? You can actually set these default values, options, and these other three properties all you want, and the code will say, hey, did you set it on the attribute? Because you can set, well, not the reader and writer options, but did you set these other three properties in as an attribute somewhere? If you did, I'm going to use those. If you didn't, I'm going to fall back and use the values here. And right now, since we're not doing any kind of code gen or IL emit or anything that's based upon these three properties or the reader writer options, that it works today. Maybe it won't work in the future, or it won't work in multi-threaded cases.
I agree with David. It's a bit weird to store state in options. It seems like like in JSON.NET, there's the converter, there's the serializer, and then there are some options. And I think it actually is the right
layering.
Your kind of entity model, if you will.
It almost seems like, so it sounds like right now we've got options which contain state, and it should be the inverse. You should have state which contains the options that are passed in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that is what this is. It's just we called the state class JSON Serializer options.
Because if the state was hidden, then the option can still be a key to it, so it still needs to be roughly immutable, or needs to be frozen once it's ever been used as a key.
But then the question is, so, like, I know some people are into this freezing. I'm kind of like, I think options types need to be mutable. Otherwise, they almost defeat the purpose. Like, it's so difficult to pass all the, as the options grow, you want to set properties. You don't want longer constructors where you pass many things.
Yeah.
Then freezability, in my opinion, is kind of like, in guidelines, I would say consider. Like, if you care, consider making it freezable. If you don't, I'm completely fine with, like, people do stupid things, change properties while the stuff is running. Too bad. Exceptions or undefined state, I don't care. Like, it's an option to make it safer and safer.
Right. I mean, our approach on it, I say on this one, the problem is because you're changing with the attributes what data does and doesn't get serialized. That one changing midstream has potential security implications. So that one we would say that from a security review, we would say this has to freeze because you don't want a bad sharing across threads or a bad cache reuse or something to now introduce a security bug. We want what gets serialized to be very deterministic. But otherwise, if you change in the middle and you say don't skip null value on read changes to true, who cares?
Add attribute, I had this whole discussion about attributes being the source of modification, and to me it seems like the wrong abstraction where the attribute is kind of input to the actual underlying policy. You don't call add attribute and you add like actual attributes. Like you don't add the attribute type. You change the policy, and attributes are just input to that policy. So
and what attributes can I add here?
Yeah, so
Data annotations attributes.
If you scroll down more, you'll see like there's JSON property attribute.
Yeah.
What do they apply to? If I call the one that just takes attribute,
I don't know.
Aren't some of the attributes things like control how this name gets serialized across the wire?
I mean, I'll talk about this again, and I have a section or two in here talking about it. But basically, the thing is, we support design time attributes. You know, most serializers do, and the more you can push, in my opinion, to design time attributes, the better. In the sense of you know, be able to help with caching, to make sure your class is always serialized properly and deserialized depending on who's using your type, that sort of thing. So then the question is, well, how do I change some stuff or override some of that information at runtime? Maybe I don't own the POCO types, or they're in another assembly and they're shared by 20 different serializers, and you know, I can't touch them, that sort of thing. So then you need a runtime way to do the exact same thing. And so instead of adding another API off to the side, I elected here just to say, you know what, just add the attributes at runtime. And it seems to work in my mental model. Not as intuitive, and it's not as conventional as other ways, but without duplicating, you know, the API work.
So I was looking at this optional feature API ability to override default behavior, and this issue with the attributes, and the issue that we discussed before, like which type do we instantiate and whatnot.
There's a whole feature
So
here, right?
I thought, and I actually implemented one serializer. It was not a JSON but binary serializer, and I thought about this thing, and I imagined that this is the way I would design it. You have an option class, and you can actually inherit from it. And it has a virtual method that says, you know, give me a type for something. And then you can override it, and you can provide your own type. And same with many of the other things that are controlled with, you know, attributes. And I think, like, we would have a type that works the way it works on POCO objects, and then if you want to control, there are a bunch of callbacks on this type, basically, that lets you control.
So you're basically saying, give me the type you want me to use for deserialization.
Yeah.
How at that point, how does JSON serializer options not become this parameter in all of the static methods we've been creating? Like, move it to the front, call it this, and then say, hey, now JSON Serializer is a non-static class.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to change the behavior of serialization.
That is we just discussed. I would be, sure.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, like, you know, there would be one way to tweak. All the knobs would be basically virtual callbacks that are being called. By default, they do something, and you can override it. Because now it seems like we have a type. You can provide JSON class materializer. Or we have attributes that you can apply, and maybe some other options that are Boolean properties. It would be nice if there was a very flexible mechanism and it always works the same. We basically describe, this is the default behavior of our JSON serializer. If you don't like it, inherit from it, as you're proposing, and override some virtual method that does something else.
Right. How would you serialize that stuff, though? Deserialize it?
Do you have an example of an custom attribute provider? That's a framework type, right?
That's
a reflection
info,
thing.
method info. You can pass a property info there.
Yeah.
I think
it's an assembly. It's a property.
So to call this, if you want to apply an attribute to a property, you would do type of blah, get property, pass in there, and pass new JSON property. Yeah, this is in the same vein as EF like modeling, where you model your POCOs as EF database objects, and they have a Fluent API for saying these properties, these like attributes, these whole things. It's kind of the same space, right? This is a bit cleaner because they have kind of a domain-specific API over reflection, so you don't have to go this low. You're kind of saying things like, for this property, I want this to be an auto ID or this to be, something else. This feels very low level. Maybe it's a fine building block, but I have this aversion to adding runtime attributes versus a callback. I kind of prefer the thing where you're given control over like.
So the callback would take a property info as a parameter?
I don't know if it would.
Well,
the question becomes: do you need an imperative way?
All of this can be cached very efficiently, much more so than any callback, I think. We can cache the result of the callback, but if there's custom code in that callback that's varied, that changes based upon other information, you'd also have to say in that callback whether the value can be cached.
Well, doesn't the attribute have that same issue right now?
It does, yeah, it should, right?
No, it doesn't.
No?
Can you write arbitrary code? No, so I guess they're only a fixed set. Yeah. So for attributes, do you support a fixed set, or can you write your own?
You can write your own attribute, yeah.
Does it not run arbitrary code?
No, because the attribute itself, the attribute itself isn't going to change. The instance isn't going to change.
No,
but the code you call in the attribute to do stuff, isn't that like?
Yeah, but it's static data, right? Yes.
No. Is it static?
Basically the attributes are going to be static properties, and they're not expected to randomly, change behavior.
So that's the same.
Well, so as a concrete example,
it's not, because a callback is completely different than some design time attribute, or apply to run.
How do you make a custom attribute affect behavior that you haven't planned for if you don't have a thing to call into?
You cannot pass arbitrary attributes here.
That's the question, right?
They have to be the data construct attributes or something.
So if you can pass those 4, it's fine. But if I want to add my own thing to serialize snake case, how do you cache that if I write arbitrary code to?
Yeah, we can talk about that. There's an extensibility model explicitly for camel casing, or for casing properties that you would add a new attribute.
Yeah. So I don't understand. What's you made the performance argument that something can be cached with attributes but not with callbacks. With callbacks, you don't need to cache anything. It's basically just you return like, hey, I don't like the property name foo. I want you to serialize it as bar. That's it.
Well, it depends, right?
Maybe it's
does that, right?
It's
the RFMIT code would call this
the virtual
callback.
You're opting out of pre-can these 4 things and saying instead of doing those 4 things, call this method instead. It's a complete opt-out.
Steve, you started talking, but you faded out.
Yeah, well, I quit. We were over talking for a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
You put a virtual method on here that you can override, which I'm not necessarily against. It's just that by doing that, you can read other values on here. For example, when you have an attribute class, you don't get passed in the options class. You know what I mean? You don't know what's out there. It's very simple by design. You're gonna read, have bools and ints and whatever have with your functionality, and then your implementation of your attribute has a well-defined method that we call to do something like, give me the snake case value of your property. Then we can cache that string coming back instead of having to call the method every time, for example.
Yeah, but I'm going back to the main motivation for this design. Every single serializer that I've seen in my career, it starts simple, and then people start, demanding more and more knobs. And then, attributes work for this one, but don't work for this other thing. Oh, I'm going to now add a different node. You already have a proposal for second node. The optional features API is basically a callback-like type, because attributes don't scale to class materializers. And over time, these things just don't scale, in my opinion.
They don't.
And we end up with very complicated OM as opposed to a single serializer type that you inherit, override 3 methods if you want to control what types get created, how properties are being serialized, what casing, what not casing.
So in your scenario, it sounds like you want the serializer itself to control things like camel casing as opposed to the object model to control that. Did I understand that correctly?
The callback method could say, hey, I'm going to read from the object some attribute and control it based on attribute. It's totally extensible.
But this is basically Right, so we have a bunch of hard-coded built-in options, right, and properties, like camel casing and property name and that stuff. And then we have an imperative way to describe where to put those attributes on our runtime. You want to do anything else. You want to customize snake case.
Yeah.
Someone has to write custom code that runs somewhere. So either that becomes an attribute that runs custom code, or it becomes a virtual on some class or an interface.
Yeah.
Like JSON has JSON converters where you can write arbitrary code to read and write your types.
Yeah.
I think this is leaning towards that, where attributes kind of give you a declarative way to do things and build time friendly and that kind of stuff. But if you want to just write code to control this type or this property, you need to have a thing to
You do.
implement.
And that's what the main job of the attributes is, to create a converter.
Yeah.
And some converters, the information from them can be cached.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The ones that you're aware of can be cached.
And the big benefit to this approach is you don't have to go and add attributes to every type that you want to support to control how it's serialized. You can just support it without the end user having to take a dependency on JSON.NET or
The thing that
XML serializer or whatever. They
But both
just
approaches allow you.
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
One is you add an attribute here, and the system pretends that the attribute is applied to the type. The other one is just a virtual method, and you
I gotta say,
do exactly what the attribute would cause the system to do if it was there.
yeah. I mean, like, the API is not very friendly, right? Like, you have to do reflection to walk the object model to find the thing you want, and then like apply a tree to it. You can imagine a way to use like
Also,
trees.
imagine that I have a cross-cutting thing that I want to do. For example, I want to lowercase all properties. I don't care what they are. Well, now I have to like apply 1,000 attributes to all my object model because they have 1,000
No, that's why
Add a
it has
global
the
attribute.
That's why there's a global attribute model for that. They apply to everything.
Well,
I really think-
How do I now?
Like what you
Is global attribute? What does it mean?
Yeah, like
to
this.
everything.
Basically, any type has all the attributes on it plus the one you have in global context.
Okay, I
You
want.
want a link statement. You want to write a filter that says like I want to see these types, and then I want to do where, then and then apply this. It's basically
So use an alternative to
An
this.
object model
So you
for
could
this.
imagine like something that Mitch's reflection context, right? You just pass in the reflection context that
Yes.
this thing should use, right? Now reflection context in itself would be not very convenient, right? So if you look at how Math v2 works, you basically have a builder where you can say,
that.
blah blah blah, from types in assembly, and then
Okay,
you
yeah.
say
It has the same-
dot export, right?
Yep.
And you just call a method and it will do whatever it takes to mark this as an export. Because it's the same here. You just have a bunch of methods that say
Do we
mark
want
is
that?
serializable, mark is not serializable.
Do we want that? We
Well-
want to have an object model that is over reflection.
I think it depends on what you want, right? Like you can either say you have a callback-based method where you basically write your policy.
I think you need both anyway.
That is not very declarative, which has the downside you basically have to run the
That's
program to see what it does.
So I would do the following. I would do the very flexible callback mechanism, and then people would say, "Geez, it's so inconvenient. I would want this attribute to just be applied,"
Then you add.
and then we add it.
support.
So basically, now we
You
kind of
invert.
like it's done in the reverse. We added the special cases, and the generic one is not provided. I would provide the generic one, and then based on people's feedback, what they want to do.
what are the signatures of the callbacks?
I'm about to serialize a property. This is the name of the property. Do you want me to do?
No,
anything?
I mean, I just want to say one thing about if we do that, which I think some of that we want to do anyway. I
Yeah.
mean, some of those methods, but a lot of these properties can be applied per attribute. I mean, sorry, these attributes can apply per property.
Right.
So at some point, then we need to call a method for every single property to say, hey, do you want case sensitive or case insensitive for in an individual property, assuming we want to support that at a per property level, not a type. The current model is can fall back to the type, because it has the declarative information on it and can cache that. So they'll be very chatty, at least until you get warmed up. It's just something to think about.
Maybe you can't do property. You can only do type level. Then you control that whole
Yeah.
type.
Yeah, I was assuming, property in that
Well,
scenario.
Well, you need to do this attribute check on per property basis.
But you don't call custom code. You generate the code that. But if you have a camel case attribute, you would just generate code up front that would camel case those properties because you knew ahead of time that they're camel case.
You'd have to do things like seal that attribute.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, you could do the same thing with callbacks, right? I mean, like, I don't think we need to provide the guarantee that says that the callback runs every single time you serialize the property. You can just say
Runs once.
your policy is static. So if you base it on the date of the week or something, like, screw you.
Screw you, okay.
I just generate a ref and mid-based
Fair, you're
code,
right. You could call
and
it
then you
once.
cache the same level, right?
Okay.
I recommend take a look at the JSON property attribute from JSON.net. They have the same name. And look at those properties to see if they could all move to the class.
Right.
There's some things like property name, that probably only belong to a property, a single property. But a lot of the other ones, you can either specify the type or the property. But if we want to remove some functionality and only support the type, it limits, I think, some scenarios.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's I asked for the signatures, I would not give you the object instance. I would just give you the property info, the method info, so you don't get to vary it based on the value.
Because you don't have the ability to look at the object because you're being cached.
Yeah, if you're being cached.
I get it. I'm just wondering, like, what that destroys. What can you do in that case?
Well, I mean, any policy you have should be based on the type shape. I mean, what else would you base it on?
Some people have policy based on should I be allowed to serialize this based on like the current user.
Yeah.
Like that's, I find that a bit tenuous, but.
There's a feature here that I don't have, which is the ability that I don't have yet. And we've talked about it before. It's the whole, I want to serialize everything myself.
Yeah.
I want to provide if-then logic. And we need that. I don't have it.
Okay.
But that's the ultimate fallback to all this attribute stuff and whatever. Like, hey, here's 1,000 lines of code I need to serialize my class. Basically, you're going to be calling reader writer manually in a lot of cases. But, you can still do whatever you ultimately want. The 2% case, maybe.
The reader and writer, maybe.
And the object.
Oh, you would need the instance of the
case,
object, clearly, yeah. Because the object has a...
If you have an object model or a tree with 50 classes and one or two of them don't serialize properly because of something, maybe they got a collection that has a mix of integers and strings or some polymorphic thing, then you still want to use our serializer for those other 48 types, and then you write your own serializer that hooks in to this at runtime to serialize your other two types manually, or maybe you can serialize part of your type if you only have one property, and we'll handle the other properties.
I mean, the alternative is that we just say screw that. Like, if you want to vary based on user, for example, at that point you need to control the serializer because you have to do your own caching. You can just say for the current user, I have a cache reflection emit, and like my whatever serializer it's instantiated with the user.
Yeah.
So it's immutable over there, but I never have to look at the actual instances to determine that.
And the scenario I gave, by the way, is not at all good practice.
That's what I would say.
I've
It's
seen
just
people do it
screw that.
I've
Like,
seen
if
people
you want to do this,
before,
you can.
It makes me cry.
So you mentioned that attribute is the same name as JSON.net. Isn't that problematic?
Why would it be?
I didn't think about it at the time, but it could be. That's something to talk about, actually.
It's the same simple name, right?
You mean the JSON property name attribute, that one specifically?
JSON property attribute is also.
If I have both in the same, if I'm porting over from JSON.net to this new serializer,
they're in different namespaces, so you could always totally qualify the name.
That
sucks.
Yeah.
Well, you could also do using cool JSON property name attribute equals blah blah blah. You can alias that.
Lame.
James, can you rename it?
Okay.
I purposely did not try to pick that same name, by the way. It just came out that way, so.
Which probably means it's a good name.
It's a good name, but every single person that uses Preview 3, all four of them.
Yeah, but okay, but let's go for this for a second. So let's say we pick a different set of attributes from JSON.net, right? Now you convert your code base. Now what? You still have to edit every single fucking file. It's not going to be pretty. So I think the only thing we could do, either decide we care about that migration path to be smoother, and then we just say, given that this layer just cares about reflection, but we should just care about names, we could actually just honor that attribute because it's the same fucking name. You can just say,
what if
full name equals this or equals that, and then you just go with it.
James, what if you support the new attribute?
That's actually going to reverse it on its head and say, this would be something that I think this would make Christoph happy too. If you had the JSON serializer itself have a bunch of virtual methods, you could have a compatibility pack which sits on top of that and says, I understand all of the old attributes as well.
Yeah, it's a subtype. Right?
We should figure that design.
Yeah.
I've seen that bad design.
I do have a section in the design notes that kind of talk about that as well. Not necessarily JSON.net attributes, but we were using some of the, the ones from system serialization.
I guess.
But yeah, I do think that compat pack is a good idea.
No, so like if you wrote a bunch of code that read attributes, you don't know because you don't have the actual objects. Yeah, you don't have that yet, do you? You couldn't like right click it, like got a callback while looking at the object graph to say like apply attribute. No, I see.
So I have Steve. I have a random related question.
You're right.
Do you serialize read-only properties?
By default, right now it does, yes.
Okay, but you don't deserialize them, I assume.
Of course we can. I think you might actually get an exception because I didn't write the 10 lines of code to handle that yet.
Okay.
But yeah.
So, but we believe that's the right thing. We're not going to do something crazy like finding the backing field and setting that, right?
No, but you see, this is what. So we had some email exchanges. I would not use this type in Azure SDK.
So if you say this type, what is this type?
This serializer.
Do we need to make changes to it to make it usable for you?
For me to use it, it would need to be able to serialize and deserialize object graphs that are, for example, immutable and have internal properties. And the way I would do it is through some feature like this callback, where I put the code that composes the graph in my assembly with the types that have internal fields. Therefore, I can just call the fields.
Yes, that
Serializer just calls me and says,
This sounds a lot like the MVC model binding system.
No, it's crazy.
And I think we're going to have that with this feature that I mentioned, that you can do whatever you want on a per type basis.
In which feature? It doesn't exist yet, correct?
Yeah, it doesn't exist yet. It's the ability to write your own, serializer, deserializer method for a type. You basically specify a converter for a type, and we are going to have a read and a write method that we call, and we give you everything that we know, and there'll
exactly.
be some
So this goes back to the virtual methods. Like, I imagine that all these features would basically just be the set of virtual methods where I can create my own subtype of the serializer in the assembly with the model types, with the object graph.
Like a visitor pattern where there's two passes. There's the first pass, which is the actual policy walk. You want the whole object graph, and you return the current attributes. And by default, the default implementation does reflection to find the attributes, but you can overwrite and add more. You can add your whatever you want to add there.
Okay.
And it runs once per type, and it's cache aggressively. And then the second pass is for the actual writing and reading the object graph.
Yeah, and you can just remove attributes from this whole equation and return strings and ints and do logically the same thing. Yeah,
we should.
So, are we complicating this though?
No, so I wonder if we leave it for now, and then we remove the APIs in the next release, and then we do this thing instead.
So keep in mind though, how would you do this on AOT? Because you have to.
AOT would not. Well, you could run that code hopefully at build time.
Yeah. So exactly the feature that I described, it also solves the IoT problem, which is basically at design time you create the subtype of this type, and it doesn't do any reflection.
You only want the object graph using system reflection metadata. We added a new type system where you get type info, but it's reflection only load basically. That thing.
Well, I mean, given that we now have assembly, what's it called, metadata load context, you could basically use reflection APIs and have it work at build time. The only thing. The only thing is what I'm asking is if you look about policy, we have to make sure that you can, at least in principle, emit code that does not require runtime state, right?
Agreed.
Otherwise, you now have this indirection literally in every single call side.
I think you want the policy walk to be once per type.
Right.
But you can still overwrite every single call and figure out what to do per property, per field, per whatever.
Would a simple version of that walker look like maybe the default one just looks at public properties, but yours looks at internal properties as well?
Yeah. Your type, yeah.
So the only problem with that kind of thing is if you do caching per type, it's fine. But at build time, like we said, at runtime we can just say the state associated with the options, let's say, or it's associated with the serializer. You can't do this at build time. How would I do that?
You need it.
So I can only statically generate a bunch of serialization code if that is true for the entirety of the application.
You just need to
I'm
figure
not
out.
sure I understand. If
need
I
an entry
basically
point.
have custom code that does the serialization, deserialization, it's equivalent to me manually writing, a loop using the reader or writer,
Right.
and then setting properties on the type that I know what it is.
Right.
What I need to cache if I'm in this situation? I don't actually need any caching at this point. My code is as efficient as it gets. And now I'm using the serializer basically as a way to handle, it's the state machine that knows where it is and tells me, hey.
No, there is some information you might want to cache. For example, let's say you have a property name that needs to be escaped, and you might want to cache that.
Yeah.
The first pass can cache state to be used by the second pass.
Yeah.
I would have to do it basically in my code manually. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, if you literally, like, if you actually register a callback that says, handle serialization and deserialization for type T, at that point you basically.
It doesn't have to be a callback though. It could be like a statically declared thing in MS
Well,
build.
it doesn't matter whether it's a callback or not. All I'm saying is that if that's what you do, you have to do it for your entire object graph. That's still a lot of work. I think most people won't do that.
By the time it would, that's how it would work, right?
What
would gen
part,
that entire thing?
What part is a lot of work?
Like, if I literally have to, like, in order to make Christoph's scenario work, right, where basically all my properties are read-only because everything is internal state, right? Yeah. So I can just say, okay, give me a callback that says deserialize object. You give me basically the data.
Yes.
Serialized object, you give me the object and a writer, and I write everything. Like,
totally.
I can now do Christoph's scenario. It's just that if I have like 100 types, it's not going to be pretty on my end, right?
Right.
At which point the question is, what value does the serializer provide? You're saying it still does the walking.
So the serializer is a coordinator at that point. So for example, you would not take a JSON writer as a parameter. You would probably take like some internal type used by the JSON serializer to say, oh, by the way, like I also know how to write out T and U and V and W.
And that's the key, because you have to be able to call back out into the writer to serialize things that you may want to have it right. So if you control your type and then you saw like a person that wasn't your type, you could call write T and that would call back into the bigger loop and serialize the whole thing.
Right, like that's the
Yeah.
But so I'm saying it's some sort of writer, right? Like, really, you don't take JSON writer, right?
It needs to be more higher than
right. You would take something akin to, but maybe not quite the JSON serializer at that point.
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm kind of hearing is this mystery feature that I talk about with the class material or serializer. I mean, I need to get that like fleshed out, I think, for us to be able to rationalize current API.
Do we need those things for now? In the MVP? Default, refemit, and reflection?
When you say these things, you mean add attribute or
the option for the class materializer? Do we need that enum?
It even says here optional. I assume it can just come later.
Can we remove it for now?
We can remove it for now. Yeah, that's why I said it's optional, and it's also dependent upon a runtime way to ask to see if refemit is available or not.
We have that now.
Feature. Okay.
We have that thing now.
Was that added?
Yeah, in 3.0.
Is refemit available and is it good?
Is dynamic code supported?
It's part of 3.0.
We did it.
And it's under 2.1.2.
In a bad way though, and then it's being fixed in 3.0.
Unless there's a scenario that you don't want to have dynamic code. Maybe you have one instance of one object and one property to serialize.
I mean that's fair, but I don't know if you would run the JSON serializer over that, would you?
Yeah, I exaggerated, but
yeah.
No, but it's interesting.
I'll pull it out if that other feature is there, and there's a good way to determine that. Yeah, I'll remove it.
Well, the other feature is not available for the source portable package.
It is not. You're right.
So it'll just be an if-def, and maybe that whatever you if-def on, you can change it manually if you want.
Well, I could use reflection to discover those.
I did have a quote here. If you had it to default, I tried to do a refemit, and then if it failed, I would catch that specific exception and then flip it over to standard reflection. I did have that code in the earliest prototype, and I just took it out. But we could do something like that if we really want to.
So Levi sent an email to us a long time ago about setting fields without refemit.
Yes.
Did that ever go anywhere?
No. But
it could. Right?
It could, yeah.
Then you wouldn't even need this thing anymore, right? It would just work.
It's just that standard reflection is so incredibly slow.
I think I own that feature, actually.
unsafe thought.
Oh, right. I'm partial owner of system reflection. Great. Okay.
I think for now, though, I have the note to remove this, and we can add it back, I guess, if we need to. So.
But you see, this would be one of my callbacks.
Yes, and no.
Set field, string name, source, destination.
So speaking of fields, Steve, do you also support fields or just properties?
Properties.
Just properties. Okay.
I think maybe
Thoughts?
I don't care.
maybe we remove.
Given the properties are so lightweight, I have no problem saying you have to put in the get set thing. I'm also fine with saying if the field is public and get set, if the field is public and clears get set, like we can also handle that.
James, are you still on the call? No, okay.
Yeah, I am.
Oh, have you heard from customers that they're very vocal about properties versus fields versus whatever? Do they generally not care?
I don't hear about it just because JSON.NET has always serialized and deserialized everything. So it's never been an issue which has come up. So I don't know.
That's funny. So I will, after this meeting or maybe tomorrow, I will send two callback methods that I think would solve the problem. Where now in Azure SDK we could actually use this type if we have that.
So one question I have is, because I said it last time, like, what are your thoughts on reflection context?
Wait, as the API?
Well, as the mechanism, whether it is the API.
I just think it's too heavy and it's gonna be too slow.
Can't we just have an object that walks the object?
Well, I
around?
would say, to me, it would be not an alternative to callbacks. It would be an alternative to the attribute-based design.
Oh.
No. What?
Well, attributes as in, of course, the customer can put it into the source code, right? Like that's fine. I'm saying that if you need to customize somebody else's type of attributes, then rather than doing that, I would do reflection context. But if we say we don't want to have these attributes calls either, we only want the callback mechanism, then that's fine too.
What does it look like, that context? What API is that today? Or how do you use it today?
Well, the way it would work is you would basically pass in the reflection context you want the JSON serializer to use when it walks your objects.
How do you get one?
There's an API that gives you the current one, and then you can basically say you can create your own one, and then basically you have to define basically what amounts to a mapping. The runtime gives you a type, and then you have to create the type in your universe.
My bet is that it's super hard to use.
It's not going to be pretty.
No.
And all I'm saying is that we could build something on top of that would be better than, and it would be still more lightweight than, let's say, type converter.
Yeah. I think either a builder API.
But I don't think I think the problem with reflection context is we never really baked the API.
There you go.
It's a good idea on paper. I don't think anybody ever used it.
A builder API where you can target properties using like C# syntax and reflection trees, that kind of stuff, or a visitor API that walks the object graph and then like walks the type graph and then gives you a callback per thing saying like visit type, what attributes are on this type, visit property, what's on this property. I'm not sure what we need.
Yeah, I think if we go with callbacks, I would not do attributes in the callbacks. I would basically say the callbacks themselves are the policy. And so basically you have so there's a callback for what case you want me to use for this property, and then you just do
That's
whatever.
too specific, though, right?
Isn't this how MVC and Web API have worked under the covers though?
Yeah.
And don't customers actually seem to like that?
Yeah.
But that's heavyweight too.
It is heavy.
It is, but it's. I believe MVC and Web API work around it by just saying we do all of the hard stuff up front, and the only stuff that takes place per request is the relatively lightweight stuff.
Lightweight.
I mean, that's akin to what we've been talking about for the past half
So
hour.
why do you think it's easier to say, give me properties for this thing, and then you new up attributes, than to say,
no,
I just give you
the attributes
answer.
tell you, the attributes are just a declarative way to say, here's the callback that implements the behavior we want. The callbacks themselves are the programmatic way.
Right.
Okay, maybe I'm confusing two things here. So I'm saying, I think we're all in agreement that the customer can put some attributes in their code, right?
Yes.
And like as in brackets on the actual thing, right?
Absolutely.
That's fine. So what we're talking about now is like, if that is not enough for you because either you don't control the types or you just don't want to do that. You want to do it programmatically. And then we talk about now the shape of these APIs. And I'm saying in these APIs, I would avoid system.attribute as a core API. I would just say you have a policy. indicated
Yes.
by the kind of callback.
That's fine.
And you what you want to do there.
Well, here's the question.
But
So
you don't up fake attributes in return.
Agreed. So
That
imagine
seems
you got a
reckless.
callback for a type and for a property. The question is, once you have that callback and you're saying, I'm at property name
Yes.
in my person type, what do I call to set policy? Do I call some new object model? Like policy.set camel case, policy.blah,
For example.
or set callback?
That's
fine.
That's probably the cleanest way to do it.
Better.
Yeah.
Yes. Because then attributes are just input to the policy. So by
Yes.
default, we read the attributes and call a bunch of methods on this policy object,
Yep.
and then pass you and say, hey, this property has this policy. Tweak it if you want to.
Yeah, and one of those methods is a virtual method, which is give me the name that you want me to serialize out to the wire.
Right.
Right. Actually, like I'm looking at this callback thing, and Steve, I think you actually have something very similar to this.
Where on attribute?
JSON enum converter attribute, like it's an attribute that returns a delegate effectively. Where the delegate is a callback.
So we're almost out of time. We are out of time here, but yeah. So I looked at certain plugin points like have arrays and things like that, and I added a special base attribute that you could derive from and have complete control. Things like camel casing, I don't want to necessarily have to implement snake casing and other variants and enums, bit enums and things like that. So I'm like, hey, I'm just going to create my own well-known attribute here that you derive from and do what you need to do, which is essentially, could be a callback as well.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to spend a bunch of time in preview for like using this thing in Anger and then like making changes to the API.
This thing in Anger.
This is kind of
well, that's.
By the way, so I know that it's late. One thing. Version resilient serialization, deserialization, round tripping.
It's
you see the serialization, so it's as version resilient as you named it.
I misspoke and I said I just need those two callbacks to be able to use it in Azure. And by the way, if I cannot use it in Azure SDK, we will use the DOM. But then every single developer needs to implement version resilience, which I kind of don't.
Can you be more specific than that?
So, for example, the thing is that let's say we release some Azure SDK version 1, and Azure returns these fields in the JSON payload, and then they start returning more. Or somebody grabs an SDK from newer SDK and calls a previous version of Azure API, and now it returns less. The serializer needs to be resilient to it. And in some cases, it needs to be able to run trip. So the way it's done in that framework, there's this dictionary. You can put a dictionary in your model type, and if the serializer sees a property that it doesn't actually have, it just puts it into the dictionary. And then when the type is serialized, it puts it back into the payload. Without this feature, it seems like there will be breaks.
Oh, we need that feature. I've been calling that the overflow feature. But
yeah.
Oh, so it's not planned for this release. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's what we decide to be MVP. So if a requirement is that, Azure needs these or someone else needs these, then we'll add it. Pending time and schedule, of course.
Yeah.
Preview 3 is coming out in 2 weeks. We're branching soon. Preview 4 is when I think we're going to use the serializer in ASP.NET Core.
Yeah.
You're not gonna use?
We're gonna use it in Preview 4. We have to figure out how to get changes and make API changes and feed the loop going.
The thing is, though, with policy, it scares me a bit that I don't think we can design an MVP and ship that, because I think we have to design for much more than the MVP, and then only maybe implement a subsection of it, because we have to think about how round tripping interacts with certain policies, right? It all has to work. In principle.
Yeah, and as a disclaimer, I mentioned at the top here that there's other features that will affect the API, and they might even affect the current API. So I don't know what I don't know. So I could definitely spend some time on a custom serializer, deserializer, and then along with that some callbacks and get that kind of fleshed out, because I think that is probably going to be required for MVP, at least a custom deserializer. But I think we can keep making progress on, keep meeting until we get this hashed out.
I think
Or should
honestly,
we-
like the one of the things we can just do is like just write the things up that we need to solve, and then at least decide whether we need to solve them in order to validate the design, or whether we think they're isolated things.
Like
we
the build
can,
time thing, for example. I think
Everyone
that one's
does-
required to actually try end to end.
That's the thing with build time. That's what I said on the email
Have
thread.
to
Like,
try
if
it.
we really believe AOT is a core scenario, like we kind of have to think about how this works in build time.
Unity.
I have a list of pending features on the bottom. Those are the ones I assume we need for MVP.
Yeah.
So
let's just quickly do an open issues thing. So, module the feedback that we have, we need to think about AOT generation more.
And I do think that this callbacks, the knobs, and AOT, they are all
Yeah,
related.
same
They are
soup, same
kind
feature.
of the same feature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The immutable, basically, immutable object graph and AOT is, in my opinion, the same feature. Or very similar. And version resilience.
Yeah, version resiliency, I don't like the term because it seems very broad. I would say it's overflow round tripping,
Round
right?
tripping?
It's overflow, underflow plus round tripping. That's really what it is.
Sure.
Because that one I can at least see us solving. Arbitrary version changes where you're like, oh, I renamed this type, now give me a callback to accommodate those payloads. I would say, fuck it, like if you do things like this, you.
Speaking of which. But you see, well-designed set of callbacks, they solve all these problems.
Yeah. Then the only thing is to figure out what to put top level that are super common.
Yeah.
What casing is a bool? Sure. A bool. Should be a bool actually. Is that in there? Do we have
For
camel
what?
casing? Camel casing, is that in MVP?
Well, yeah, okay. The reason why the design is like it is there's more than one way to do casing. There's snake casing, and I don't know, 3 or 4 different ways to do it. And I made it a separate attribute, so it's extendable. And so if you have a bool here, and if you want to support snake casing, well, then it should be an enum. And And what if someone wants to write their own?
So hold on. If I want camel casing today, what do I do?
You would either have to put an attribute on your class or a call add attribute, depending on.
Right. Which one?
Global.
I have an example of that later
Okay.
in the doc.
Okay.
Oh, we're gonna keep we're gonna keep having more and more attributes for all the things that people want to
I was gonna
do.
ask him, yeah.
Yeah. I would also say casing is probably mostly a global shedding, right?
It's global. Yeah. We wanted to set the bool. True.
The JSON property attribute, in theory, would hold all of the common ones, that are simple bools and ints and stuff, and that aren't necessarily extendable. I mean, are you really going to, extend skip value on read, I guess, that sort of thing. But as soon as there's an attribute like casing that, you can write n number of different casing strategies, then it becomes its own attribute that can be extended by
Casing isn't necessarily global. So, for example, sometimes people want to camel case their property names on classes, but they don't want to camel case the key names in dictionaries. So when those are serialized to JSON, they both look the same, but they can have different meanings. Like you don't want to start messing around with keys on a dictionary. Like, for example, it might be employee permission stored in a dictionary, and if you camel case that, then it changes the underlying value.
And things like snake casing, which is adding underscores in between words, can get very complicated. You have to look at linguistics and things like that. And it's something I didn't want to implement here.
Yeah,
and
I don't think it needs to be in by default.
Oh, speaking of camel casing, I'd highly recommend you just copy and paste JSON.NET's logic for doing it. It's more complicated than you would think to camel case something how you would expect, like camel casing something to what a user would expect. Like there's lots of little corner cases, and it's a thing that once you ship it, if you change the camel casing rules, it's a breaking change. in JavaScript, because JavaScript is case sensitive, and the JSON.NET camel casing logic has changed a couple of times, and some people have gotten angry with me when I've done that. But I think all
casing
the
is lowercase the first character.
But what if it begins with an underscore?
yeah, but like, what happens if there's an underscore? Like, do you camel case the first character after a underscore, or what happens if you have XML reader and XML is all in capitals? Like, do you just camel case the first X and not the rest? Like, there are little weird situations which
so
people don't think of on the surface.
And that is some good feedback, and that's why honestly I created the casing as a separate attribute, because I just do the simple lowercase first character.
So James, in your situation, then whatever decision you make, wouldn't that be something that someone would disagree with? So why make a decision at all? Why not be completely neutral and say, if you really want custom camel casing because you have underscores, you have whatever, you create your own property name as an attribute. I'm not going to do any magic and discover what you want me to do.
So in JSON.NET, there's a iNaming strategy interface, and then camel casing is just an implementation of that. So there's a camel casing strategy and there's a snake casing strategy. So you can, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Standard strategy, policy, whatever. But that's just like, people can go in and override it. It's just for camel casing. I think it's a pretty good implementation.
We should just
that I'd recommend looking at.
Allow it to parse an FX corp dictionary so you can use the same name convention there. Anyway, all right, so then let's wrap things up. I will send notes later and then we can talk about this. All right. I think we need another meeting on this one.
Field reference of T. Field ref of T.